A child is sinking beneath the crushing Pacific waves. His mother, a billionaire tech CEO, doesn't even look up from her phone. But when a struggling single dad risks his life to save the boy, he doesn't get a hero's reward. Instead, he gets a chilling legal threat that shatters his world. This is what happens when a good deed meets absolute, ruthless power. The sun over Newport Beach was deceptively warm, casting a golden hue over the jagged cliffs of Abalone Point. For Thomas Reed, a 34-year-old marine mechanic and single father, this Saturday was a rare luxury. He had spent months setting aside $20 bills in a coffee can just to afford a weekend day pass at the public access perimeter of the Pelican Hill Resort. Sitting on a faded beach towel, Thomas watched his 7-year-old daughter Chloe build a lopsided sandcastle. For a fleeting moment, the crushing weight of his late wife's medical debts faded into the rhythm of the crashing waves. Less than 50 yards away, sitting beneath a private cabana-striped awning, was a different world entirely. Catherine Caldwell did not do relaxing. At 42, she was the founder and CEO of Caldwell Nexus, a global logistics empire that moved billions of dollars in freight every week. Dressed in a pristine white silk cover-up that cost more than Thomas's truck, Catherine was practically fused to her satellite phone. Her icy blue eyes were locked on a tablet, displaying fluctuating stock tickers. Caldwell Nexus was exactly 4 days away from a massive initial public offering. The stress was palpable, radiating off her like heat from asphalt. "Harrison, if the SEC asks about the Singapore supply chain, you stonewall them." Catherine snapped into her earpiece, not bothering to lower her voice. "I don't care if it delays the filing by an hour. We do not show weakness. Fix it." She didn't notice her 6-year-old son, Oliver. Oliver was a quiet, pale boy, wearing a high-end designer swimsuit that looked stiff and uncomfortable. Ignored by his mother and temporarily unsupervised by the private security detail that was fetching Catherine's sparkling water, Oliver wandered toward the tide pools. The rocks at Abalone Point were notoriously treacherous, slick with green algae and pounded by unpredictable rogue waves. Thomas noticed the boy. His parental instincts, honed razor-sharp since raising Chloe alone, flared immediately. He stood up, shielding his eyes from the sun. "Hey!" Thomas muttered to himself, stepping forward. "Where are your parents, buddy?" Before the words fully left his mouth, a massive 6-foot swell surged against the cliffs. The water struck the rock face with the force of a freight train, sending a spray of white foam 30 feet into the air. When the water receded, the slick black rock where the boy had been standing was empty. Oliver was gone. "Chloe, stay right here." "Do not move," Thomas screamed. He didn't wait for her reply. He broke into a dead sprint across the sand, his bare feet kicking up clouds of dust. He reached the edge of the rocks just in time to see a flash of pale skin caught in the violent churning washing machine of the rip current. The boy was thrashing blindly, his small head bobbing under the dark water. The current was sucking him directly toward a cluster of jagged, razor-sharp reef rocks, known locally as the Grinder. Thomas didn't hesitate. He dove headfirst into the freezing Pacific. The cold hit him like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs. The current immediately grabbed him, tossing him like a rag doll. Salt water burned his eyes as he fought to orient himself. He kicked violently, using every ounce of strength he had built up from years of hauling heavy boat engines. "Reach out!" Thomas roared, breaking the surface and spitting out seawater. "Grab my hand!" Oliver was panicking, inhaling water, his eyes wide with pure terror. He went under again. Thomas took a deep breath and plunged beneath the surface. The water was a murky, swirling mess of sand and bubbles. He opened his eyes, the salt stinging fiercely, and saw the boy sinking. Thomas propelled himself forward, his outstretched hand closing around the thick fabric of Oliver's designer swimsuit. He yanked the boy upward, kicking toward the surface. They broke through into the air, Oliver coughing and screaming. "I've got you, I've got you!" Thomas yelled over the roar of the ocean, wrapping his left arm tightly around the boy's chest. But the ocean wasn't done with them. A second wave, larger than the first, crested directly above them. Thomas turned his back to the wave, curling his body over Oliver to shield the child. The impact was devastating. Thomas was slammed violently against a submerged boulder. He felt a sickening pop in his right shoulder, followed by an explosion of white-hot agony. The rough barnacles on the rock sliced through the skin of his back and the side of his head like a cheese grater. The world briefly went dark, a ringing sound echoing in his ears, but the desperate, clinging grip of the child brought him back to reality. Ignoring the agonizing pain in his dislocated shoulder, Thomas paddled with his legs and his one good arm fighting the relentless pull of the undertow. It felt like hours, an endless battle against a force of nature that wanted them dead. Finally, his knees scraped against the sandy bottom. Gasping, bleeding, and trembling, Thomas dragged himself and the sobbing boy out of the surf and collapsed onto the dry sand. It was only then that the screams from the beach reached his ringing ears. Two men in dark suits, Catherine's security detail, were sprinting down the beach. Behind them walked Catherine Caldwell. She wasn't running. She was walking briskly, her phone still tightly clutched in her right hand. Thomas coughed up a lungful of seawater, his vision blurring as blood trickled down from his temple, stinging his eye. He looked up at the billionaire. He expected to see a mother terrified, perhaps dropping to her knees in the sand to embrace her near-drowned child. Instead, Catherine stopped 3 feet away. Her face was an unreadable, flawless mask. She looked down at Oliver, who was coughing violently on his hands and knees. "Get him a towel," Catherine ordered one of her guards, her voice devoid of any tremor. "And get the car ready. We are leaving." She then turned her piercing blue eyes to Thomas. Thomas was struggling to sit up, his right arm hanging uselessly at his side, blood pooling on the white sand beneath him. "You saved him," Catherine stated. It wasn't a thank you. It was a sterile observation of a fact. He was in the rip." Thomas gasped, clutching his ruined shoulder. "You need to watch him. He almost died." Catherine's eyes narrowed slightly, a microscopic tightening of her perfectly manicured features. She didn't offer him a hand. She didn't ask if he was okay. She reached into her beach tote, pulled out a stark black business card, and dropped it onto Thomas's bleeding chest. "My legal team will be in touch, mister. Whoever you are," she said coldly. "Do not speak to the press." Without another word, she turned on her heel and walked away. The security guard scooped up the sobbing Oliver and followed her, leaving Thomas bleeding out on the sand as his daughter Chloe finally reached him, screaming his name. 4 days later, Thomas sat at the chipped formica table in his cramped Long Beach apartment, staring at a terrifying stack of papers. The ER visit had been a nightmare. 14 stitches across his scalp, severe lacerations on his back, and a severely dislocated shoulder that required heavy sedation to pop back into place. The doctor had been blunt. "You tore your rotator cuff. You cannot lift anything over 10 pounds for at least 8 weeks. If you try, you'll need surgery." For a marine mechanic, it was a death sentence. He couldn't lift tools. He couldn't pull starting cords. His boss, though sympathetic, had officially put him on unpaid medical leave. Thomas had exactly $400 in his checking account. Rent was due in 5 days. The hospital bill sitting on his table, even after his abysmal insurance, was $12,400. He rubbed his face with his good left hand, wincing as the bandages on his forehead pulled tight. Chloe was in her room, watching cartoons, blissfully unaware that they were about to lose their home. A sharp knock at the door broke the heavy silence. Thomas frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone. He stood up slowly, favoring his heavily braced right arm, and walked to the door. Looking through the peephole, he saw a man in a sharp charcoal suit standing in the gloomy hallway. He opened the door. "Can I help you?" "Thomas Reed," the man asked. His voice was smooth, professional, and entirely devoid of warmth. "I am Arthur Vance." The man stopped correcting himself smoothly, as if reading from a script. "Arthur Pendleton, legal counsel for Caldwell Nexus." Thomas's heart skipped a beat. Caldwell, the woman from the beach. "Look," Thomas said, his voice raspy. "If she's sending me a check for the medical bills, I appreciate it, but I don't want any kind of reward. I just did what anyone. Ms. Caldwell requests your presence at the Nexus Tower in downtown Los Angeles immediately." Arthur interrupted, handing Thomas a thick manila envelope. "There is a car waiting downstairs." "I'm not going anywhere," Thomas said defensively. "I'm injured and my daughter is inside. Ms. Caldwell has arranged for a bonded licensed childcare professional to sit with your daughter." Arthur replied, smoothly, gesturing down the hall, where a kindly-looking older woman in a neat uniform was standing patiently. "This is not a request, Mr. Reed. It is highly advised you open the envelope." With a sinking feeling in his gut, Thomas tore open the flap with his left hand. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a draft of a civil lawsuit. The plaintiff, Catherine Caldwell. The defendant, Thomas Reed. The charges made his blood run cold. Reckless endangerment of a minor, trespassing on private property, intentional infliction of emotional distress. "What the hell is this?" Thomas breathed, his eyes wide. "I saved her son's life. He was drowning." "The narrative of what happened is currently up for interpretation," Arthur said with a chilling smile. "The car is waiting, Mr. Reed." An hour later, Thomas was escorted out of a private elevator onto the 60th floor of the Caldwell Nexus Tower. The floor was a sprawling expanse of white marble glass and brushed steel. It felt more like a futuristic laboratory than an office. He was led into a massive corner office that overlooked the smog-choked sprawl of Los Angeles. Catherine Caldwell sat behind a desk, carved from a single slab of obsidian. She didn't look up from her laptop as Thomas was led in. "Sit," she commanded. Thomas, exhausted and pulsing with pain, sank into the leather chair opposite her. "You're suing me," he said, skipping any pleasantries. "You're actually trying to destroy my life after I pulled your kid out of the Pacific." Catherine finally closed her laptop. Her gaze was just as cold as it had been on the beach. "I have no interest in ruining your life, Mr. Reed," she said, folding her hands perfectly on the desk. "In fact, I know a great deal about your life. Thomas James Reed, widowed 3 years ago. Your late wife Sarah fought a valiant but ultimately unsuccessful battle with leukemia, leaving you with nearly $150,000 in medical debt. You work at Marina del Rey Boat Works. You make $62,000 a year. You are currently on unpaid leave due to an injury sustained last Saturday." Thomas felt a cold sweat break out on his neck. "You investigated me." "I investigate everything that enters my orbit," Catherine replied smoothly. "Now let us discuss the problem. The problem is that someone on that public beach had a telephoto lens. They captured the entire incident." She tapped a button on her desk, and a large flat-screen monitor on the wall blinked to life. It displayed a series of high-resolution photographs. The first showed Oliver wandering toward the dangerous rocks, while Catherine was clearly visible in the background, facing the other way on her phone. The next showed Thomas pulling the boy from the surf. The final, most damning photo showed Catherine walking away from a bleeding Thomas, looking utterly indifferent. These photos were shopped to a major tabloid yesterday. Catherine said, her voice tightening slightly. My company, Caldwell Nexus, goes public in exactly 96 hours. The IPO is expected to raise $4 billion. If these photos are published, the narrative will be clear. Catherine Caldwell is a negligent, heartless mother who let a blue-collar worker nearly die to save her son, and then left him bleeding in the dirt. Because that's exactly what happened, Thomas spat, anger finally burning through his shock. The truth is irrelevant, Catherine snapped, slamming her palm on the desk. Public perception is what dictates market value. If my board sees this, if the investors see this, the stock will tank on opening day. I stand to lose hundreds of millions. I will not allow that to happen. So what? Thomas scoffed. You're suing me to shut me up. I didn't take the pictures. The lawsuit is leverage, Catherine said, her tone returning to a deadly calm. She slid a thick, leather-bound folder across the obsidian desk. I don't want to sue you, Thomas. I want to hire you. Thomas stared at the folder. Hire me. The tabloids want a villain, Catherine explained, leaning forward. We are going to give them a fairy tale instead. We bought the exclusive rights to those photos through a shell company. We are going to release them ourselves, but with a different spin. She tapped the folder. You are going to sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. But more importantly, you are going to sign an employment contract. You will be introduced to the press tomorrow as Caldwell Nexus's newly appointed head of family security, and as my new romantic partner. Thomas blinked, entirely sure he had misheard her. Excuse me. The public loves a romance, Catherine said dryly, as if discussing quarterly earnings. The billionaire whose cold heart was melted by the brave, heroic single father who saved her son. We release a statement saying we were already quietly seeing each other, which is why you were at the beach with us. You saving Oliver wasn't a stranger's act. It was a devoted partner protecting his new family. The photos of me walking away spun as me being in a state of deep shock, trusting my brilliant new partner to handle the situation. You're out of your mind, Thomas said, standing up. I'm not pretending to date you. I'm not lying to the world so you can make more money. If you sign, Catherine continued, ignoring his outburst, your medical debt is wiped out today. The hospital bill from Saturday gone. Your rent paid for the next 5 years. Your daughter Chloe will be enrolled in the Brentwood Academy, fully tuition paid. You will receive a salary of $500,000 a year to occasionally stand next to me at galas and smile for the cameras. Thomas froze. The sheer volume of the money hit him like the wave at Abalone Point. It was life-changing. It was the end of his nightmares. And if I say no? Thomas asked quietly. Catherine's eyes turned to black ice. If you say no, I file the lawsuit. I have an army of lawyers who will tie you up in court for a decade. The legal fees alone will bankrupt you by Christmas. When you are homeless, I will anonymously notify Child Protective Services that a severely injured, unemployed homeless man is incapable of providing a stable environment for his 7-year-old daughter. They will take Chloe away from you. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Thomas looked at the woman sitting across from him. She wasn't just a CEO. She was a predator, casually threatening to destroy his family over public relations. You have until 8 a.m. tomorrow to sign Catherine said, looking back down at her laptop, dismissing him completely. "I suggest you learn to tie a half Windsor knot, Mr. Reed. Our first press conference is at noon." Thomas signed the papers. He did not have a choice. By Tuesday, he and Chloe relocated to Catherine's massive luxury estate in Bel Air. The mansion was a fortress of limestone and security cameras practically echoing with emptiness. Catherine was never home. When she was, she remained locked inside her study, coordinating the final details of the massive initial public offering. The press conference at the Beverly Hills Hotel had been a sickening display of theatrical perfection. Thomas, wearing a tailored Tom Ford suit that cost more than his car, stood beside Catherine as flashbulbs blinded him. He smiled when instructed, placing his good hand gently on the small of her back. Catherine had delivered a beautifully written, completely fabricated speech about how Thomas had been her rock, secretly grounding her high-stress life for the past year. The media devoured the narrative instantly. Caldwell Nexus stock projections soared. The crisis was averted. However, inside the Bel Air mansion, the illusion vanished completely. Thomas and Catherine lived like ghosts, haunting opposite wings of the estate. Yet a strange dynamic began to unfold in the sprawling backyard. Oliver, the boy Thomas had pulled from the crushing ocean, started wandering toward the guest house. The child was deeply traumatized by the near-drowning suffering from terrible night terrors. Catherine's solution had been to hire top-tier child psychologists, but Oliver refused to speak to them. Instead, he sought out Thomas. Thomas, still nursing a heavily braced shoulder, understood trauma. He understood the profound fear of losing control. He slowly started teaching Oliver how to tie nautical knots using thick ropes by the swimming pool, carefully explaining how the tension made the knots secure. Chloe, bright and fiercely outgoing, dragged Oliver into chaotic games of hide-and-seek. For the first time in his life, the billionaire's son laughed loudly, his pale cheeks flushed with genuine joy. One evening, Catherine returned home early. Walking silently, she peered around the kitchen archway. Thomas was awkwardly flipping pancakes with his left hand, while Chloe and Oliver covered them in chocolate syrup. Oliver was smiling a genuine, radiant expression Catherine had not seen in years. A strange, sharp pang struck her chest, an emotion she quickly shoved down behind her armor of corporate ruthlessness. Later that night, the fragile peace shattered. Thomas walked past Catherine's home office and heard raised voices. The door was slightly ajar. "I do not care about your threats, Richard." Catherine snapped her voice, trembling slightly. "The initial public offering is moving forward. You will get your payout and then you are done." "You are remarkably arrogant, Catherine." A man's voice sneered through the speakerphone. Thomas recognized the name immediately. Richard Gallagher was the chief financial officer of Caldwell Nexus, her right-hand man. "Did you really think I believed your pathetic little romance story? I am the one who hired the photographer at Abalone Point, Catherine. I have the unedited raw footage, not just the photos. The video. The one clearly showing you ignoring your son's screams because you were screaming at me about the Singapore delays." Thomas froze in the hallway, his breath hitching. "If you try to push me off the board tomorrow morning, before the bell rings, I will leak the video," Gallagher threatened. "The stock will plummet. The board will vote you out for gross negligence, and I will take the CEO chair before lunch. You are trapped." The line clicked dead. Thomas peeked through the gap in the door. Catherine Caldwell, the untouchable titan of industry, had buried her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook slightly. She was not the cold, unfeeling machine she pretended to be. She was a desperate mother who had made a horrific mistake, drowning in guilt, now being cornered by a corporate predator who had manipulated the entire situation from the start. Thomas stepped backward, his mind racing. He had been blackmailed into this fake life by Catherine, forced into a gilded cage. He had every reason to let her empire burn to the ground. She had threatened to take his daughter away. This was karma, pure and simple. But as he walked back toward the guest wing, he saw Oliver asleep on the living room sofa, clutching a piece of nautical rope. Thomas realized that if Catherine lost her company and faced a massive public crucifixion, Oliver would be the one ultimately crushed by the fallout. Thomas could not let that happen. The morning of the initial public offering was electric with tension. Inside the massive glass boardroom, at the apex of the Caldwell Nexus Tower, 12 board members sat in silence. Richard Gallagher sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, a smug, triumphant smirk plastered across his face. Catherine stood at the head of the table, her face a mask of pale porcelain. She looked utterly exhausted, her usual commanding presence diminished. Before we finalize the bell-ringing ceremony, we have an emergency motion, Gallagher announced, standing up and buttoning his expensive jacket. I am calling for an immediate vote of no confidence in our Chief Executive Officer. I have received highly disturbing video evidence proving Catherine Caldwell is unfit for leadership, demonstrating extreme negligence that could fatally compromise this company's public standing. Catherine closed her eyes, preparing for the crushing blow. She had no defense. Suddenly, the heavy glass doors of the boardroom swung open. Thomas Reed walked in. He was wearing his tailored suit, but he carried a cheap, battered plastic laptop under his left arm. The high-priced security guards tried to grab him, but Catherine, startled by his sudden appearance, raised a shaking hand. "Let him in!" Catherine ordered, her voice cracking slightly. "This is a closed executive session." Gallagher snapped, his smug demeanor faltering. "Security remove this ridiculous actor immediately." "I am the head of family security," Thomas stated calmly, stepping up to the mahogany table. "And I have a security update regarding corporate espionage." Thomas opened the battered laptop and plugged a thumb drive into the screen projector. "You see, Richard, when you hire private investigators to illegally record people, you should probably make sure they do not use cloud storage linked to their easily hackable email accounts. I might be a boat mechanic, but I know how to hire a very cheap, very effective hacker from the dark web, using the generous allowance my new boss provided." A massive spreadsheet appeared on the wall projector. It detailed a series of offshore wire transfers. "This is proof that Richard Gallagher deliberately paid hackers to delay the Singapore supply chain shipments," Thomas explained, looking directly at the stunned board members. "He created the company crisis entirely on purpose. He intentionally distracted Catherine on that beach, putting her child's life in extreme danger, just so he could record her reaction and steal the company." The boardroom erupted into absolute chaos. Board members shouted over each other. Gallagher's face drained of all color. He stammered frantically, trying to close the laptop, but the damage was irreparably done. Catherine stared at Thomas, completely astounded. The very good man she had callously threatened and cornered had just single-handedly saved her entire life's work. He did not owe her a single thing, yet he had fought for her when she was completely defenseless. 2 hours later, the initial public offering launched successfully. Caldwell Nexus stock opened at record-breaking highs. Richard Gallagher was escorted out in handcuffs by federal authorities, facing corporate sabotage charges. Back in the quiet solitude of her corner office, Catherine poured 2 glasses of incredibly expensive aged bourbon. She handed one to Thomas, her hands trembling. "Why did you do it?" Catherine asked softly, dropping her icy facade completely. "I was terrible to you. I threatened to take Chloe. I forced you into a corner. You could have let him destroy me." "Because Oliver needs his mother," Thomas replied honestly, taking a sip of the bourbon. "And because nobody deserves to have their child used as a weapon against them. Not even you." Catherine looked down at her desk. For the first time in her adult life, tears freely spilled over her eyelashes. She reached into her drawer, pulled out the ironclad non-disclosure agreement and the employment contract, and deliberately ripped them perfectly in half. "You are free, Thomas," she whispered, wiping her eyes. "The medical debts are fully paid. The school tuition is permanently covered. You do not have to pretend anymore. You can take Chloe and go home." Thomas looked at the torn pieces of paper. He thought about his quiet, empty apartment. He thought about Oliver's laughter, and he looked at the vulnerable, fiercely brilliant woman standing in front of him. He slowly set his bourbon glass down on the obsidian desk. "What if I do not want to go home?" Thomas asked quietly, a small smile forming on his lips. "What if I want to stay for dinner?" Catherine looked up, her blue eyes wide with genuine surprise, and for the very first time she smiled back. "What would you do if a billionaire forced you into a fake romance to save your daughter? Would you sign the contract, or would you risk it all and fight back against her ruthless empire?" Drop your thoughts in the comments below if you enjoyed this crazy real-life roller coaster of power, betrayal, and unexpected love. Please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more unbelievable daily dramatic audio stories today.